Guns, Germs, and Steel: The Fates of Human Societies by Jared Diamond. Hi all, I have another book review for you today. Linked on this podcast will be a hyperlink to all of my reviews if you like if you like this content and you want to see more of what I've posted. Initially, I had an interest in this book from an economical standpoint due to my fascination with modern monetary theory. Sorry, ladies, I'm taken. But I learned a lot more than economics. Overall, I really enjoyed the writing of the author due to the fact that he does not speak in definitive language. And with some of the topics, the author will say both sides of the story. After all, history, end quote, is not always written by those who are right. It's usually written by those who won. Nuance is important to remember when studying history because omission or biases can intentionally or unintentionally slip in. Slip in. Yeah. So those biases can unintentionally slip in, and sometimes I see them intentionally slip in based on the narrative that the historian or the journalism might want to push. So the problem with that is some historians or writers can become the alleged truth, end quote, that they share as their identity. Once that happens, they are no longer interested in continuing to find newer information, but defend a position as some sort of apologist. See my attached post for rational thinking. My post on rational thinking is a way to navigate information saturation in the 21st century. So here's an example of editorialized historians. Here's a quick example of them becoming the identity of what they've posted instead of them looking for new information. Just because the oldest evidence of human civilization was found in Africa does not necessarily mean human origin began in the African continent. It just means that what we have found in Africa is the oldest evidence we have. New evidence could always arise. When I was younger, I heard all the time that Christopher Columbus was the first to cross the ocean and discover the New World, until new evidence showed us otherwise. Do not let historians editorialize data and trick you into reading propaganda masquerading as truth. Now, on to my list. This is my list of notes. In no particular order, below are a few notes that I wanted to point out from this great book. Each point listed may not necessarily be reliant on the prior step, but certainly each line item in the list complement each other, which only serves the right populations an extreme advantage at times. You will notice a theme. You will certainly notice a theme here. So, number one, civilizations that don't adapt productive technology usually become victims of such technology by other countries. I use the word productive, end quote, as a placeholder for progressive technology, not in the political sense, but in the sense that it moved human civilization to the next level. Think guns, steel, etc. Those who adapted guns with zeal ruled over those who failed to do so. Step number two, geography and the environment play a huge role in determining outcomes. This was an amazing insight that answered a lot of questions I've had for years. I've always wondered why the largest continent, Eurasia, Europe, and Asia are mentioned as one large landmass in this book. Why did Eurasia always appear to be it always appeared to be at war within its parts, but why did it, in spite of that, dominate the rest of the world throughout history? The populations, the technology, the innovations is what I'm talking about here. So in short, the longest stretch of land, similar latitude, think Ireland to Japan, plays a role. In terms of a civilization's progression, west to east is more important than north to south, Eurasia having the longer x-axis compared to the dominant y-axis we have here in the Western Hemisphere. The longer west to east landmass is important because the similar climate led to more productivity. Example, knowledge, think innovations, could be shared in faster, larger quantities since Eurasia has the largest population of all continents. Needed calories could be grown on the vast nutrient-dense land of similar climate, and tools needed to make life easier were also shared across culture, which is to say nothing about the needed ports. So that vast similar climate is important because if you go to the Western Hemisphere, and I think it's like 3,000 miles. We got about 3,000 miles of similar latitude. Well, Eurasia has like double or triple that. So it just magnifies, the quantities of similar land and plants and crops and knowledge that can grow. So where was I? So while on the topic of culture, mountains usually separate people groups and cause us to be dissimilar. But trade, think the Silk Road, helps facilitate tolerance, therefore the largest landmass in the world, with the largest population bit momentum in the right direction. Like anything in life, the more brains you can throw at a problem, the greater chance you have of solving that problem. And the less time it takes to feed your population, the more you can innovate. Sadly, those civilizations who spent the majority of their day feeding themselves, they fell victim to step one, because they're too busy to innovate. Step number three, the large beasts of Eurasia allow a civilization to leverage strength of the animals for farming, traveling, and high-calorie dense meals at times when food is scarce. There are even cases where large animals played a role as a military tool, allowing large populations to not only have an upper hand in offense, but also logistics. From a supply chain management perspective, battles may be won by the strongest offense, but wars are won by logistics. Somebody quoted that in a book I read. Most of the smaller countries don't appear to have large mammals, for whatever reason, leaving them at a disadvantage throughout history. Step number 4, reliance on political entities can lead to a giant single point of failure. This one is less intuitive than one might think, but there is a great breakdown, a definition breakdown between a band of people versus a tribe, explained in the book. Essentially, when you have a tribe typically becomes a small town or forms a small town, and they typically create a political class. A band usually is a bunch of people, more egalitarian. So, where was I? So, when you have a larger group of people, they typically create a political class that inevitably becomes some sort of dynasty. So instead of serving the population, they make laws to benefit their legacy/relatives. We call this corruption. Sound familiar? When civilization finds themselves in a position to rely on their corrupt leaders for their basic services, the leaders eventually fail. Thus, the civilization usually falls victim to the whims of a stronger population. Now, I'm going to take a small deviation here from the list. I wrote about this in my supply chain post, linked on this podcast. But in summary, a country's weak point is at their level of consumption. Do your basic necessities to sustain life or defend yourself rely on trade with another entity that may see the world in a different place than you? If so, that's a risk. One might think that I'm talking about the United States and our dependence on China for inputs, but that is beyond my control. I'm looking at this book from a practical level, not from a geopolitical level. But that is beyond, the China-U.S., our import-export ratio is beyond my control. So I can look at what is in my control. And that is my personal ability to create things, grow food for myself, and be financially self-reliant. Here's an example. Should my zip code become unsustainable, think crime, inflation, etc., I can just move. If I make my family, which is a micro country in essence, reliant on my current zip code, I am stuck should things go wrong. Countries act similar. Of course, there is a balance to everything. I'm not saying we need to become Amish, although they are growing at a faster birth rate than the average American. But the less reliant on political services, the better off I am when said political services inevitably fail. Last step, number 5, farmers versus hunter-gatherers. Oh my, this last point is especially relevant in such times. Where to start? First, the farmer populations have a giant advantage over the hunter-gatherer populations because they typically grow more people. By now, you should have a rough idea of all the advantages of a large population, which begs the question, should we expect an Amish revolution in the future? Kidding aside, we already have mentioned the many benefits of more people. But there is another thing that we have not mentioned, that is, larger populations give way to more germs. More germs means more antibodies. You may have read about germs and their role during the Spanish colonization of the Americas, where most of the indigenous populations picked up diseases from the Europeans, and those same diseases did not seem to negatively affect the Eurasian visitors. But the author points out, most of the deaths during World War II were also due to disease, which only begs the question, in times of a pandemic, which act plays a more important role? Should we A, shut everything down and hand over the economy to the trusty politicians so we can stay home, end quote, to stop the spread, end quote, or B, focus on herd immunity? You decide. Lastly, on this topic, farmers also have the supply chain advantage over the hunter-gatherer communities where food, knowledge, skills, and everything else follows. All right, guys, that summarizes my book review of Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. A great book. Check it out if you like it. Let me know what you think. I will talk to you later.